And I think we are live.
Cool.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us on this very exciting election eve. I'm hoping that we can take a little break and talk about some SCA stuff. My name is Ashaxi. I'm from the Kingdom of Untitled, and I do once a week interviews with Laurels on Tuesdays. And tonight, my guest is Duchess Tangwystl. She currently resides in Untitled, but has spent much of her SCA career in Ealdormere and the Middle Kingdom. And she has a passion for all things Tudor. So welcome. And we are having a little technical lag and difficulty tonight, so just bear with us as we kind of work our way through it. So, Your Grace, tell me about your SCA origin story. How did you find the SCA and what kept you around?
That was pretty easy. I moved to Guelph, which is near Toronto, Ontario, and they were having a series of history lectures on medieval England. And I went to them, and they turned out to be sponsored by the local group. So that was in 1985. And I didn't really go to many events, but I just kind of hung around the local group and stayed around. It was good. It kept me around because I liked the costumes, I liked the clothing. I didn't know how to sew. I had nobody around to tell me how hard Elizabethan was, so I jumped in with it with a treadle sewing machine.
Wow. And how did you research patterns?
Working at the university, I had access to the library. The only way I learned how to sew was the Spanish Tailor's Manual from 1589 and Janet Arnold's Patterns of Fashion. I can't put a zipper in. I have no prior sewing experience except what I learned with Janet Arnold. So
that's so awesome. I love that. So when was your first official event that you actually physically went to?
That was maybe 1987. And I have a picture of what I wore. It's the only picture I have. Not that one.
We were talking earlier about why she moved to Untitled, and this is the
reason. This was our road. This was our road. This was what I made for my very first event. And at the time, I was raising Afghan hounds. So those were two of my dogs. I think it was a Norman Saxon event. And so that was my take on Norman.
I think that's pretty good for 1987.
Yeah, it was full. And yeah, it wasn't bad. It was a start. But it was all done with a treadle sewing machine, which didn't have a reverse gear.
Wow, that's impressive.
It was frustrating at times.
And did you meet someone right away that kind of fostered you, or how did you?
No, I missed, well, in some ways there was a person who fostered me. I missed one of the local meetings, and in absentia, they voted me in herald. I know nothing about heraldry. And the Middle Kingdom herald at the time was Baroness Fiona of Maidenhead, and she was living about an hour and a half away. I went and cried on her doorstep. And that ended up being a lifelong relationship. We had fun. She was considerably older than I was. And boy, did we have good times. A lot of greasy Chinese food. and bailing me out of problems. When I became Princess of Ealdormere, she was there. She was kind of my coach. And we would surreptitiously sit under trees in the back of events, drinking strongbows and making comments.
How did you happen into being fought for princess?
Ealdormere was a principality, and well, it was granted principality status by the Middle Kingdom. So in April of 1990, they held their first principality tournament, their first coronet tournament. And a gentleman who at that time was my husband, he fought for me. And that's a picture of the list that was there. And I'm in the red velvet Tudor, actually Elizabethan, sort of in the left-hand corner, kneeling down. So that was the entire list. That was the first coronet tournament for Ealdormere as a principality. And we ended up winning. And what was kind of interesting about that is I got my AOA, I think in 1988. I think 1988, hang on. Oh. So I was pretty new. Yeah, 1988, I got an AOA. And then April 1990, I find myself the first Princess of Beldomir.
Wow.
And there was nothing ready. There were no thrones. This is the prince and princess of, on the very left corner is, I believe that was the prince and princess of Ealdormere, which was a new principality at the same time, and the king and queen of the mid-realm. And then on the far right side was myself and David Martin Failsworth. The coronets didn't fit, at least not me, so I spent most of the very long court going like this and like this. The other problem, of course, is you had two new territorial principalities, Ealdormere and Ealdormere, and they got often confused, especially at Penzig, and became known as Ealdormere and Ealdormere. So it was pretty bad. It was good. But that was the very first principality event in Ealdormere. And I'm wearing white Spanish circa 1580s. Very, very stiff bodice.
And you made it all yourself?
Oh yeah. I went and pinked the sleeves and everything. This is 1990. I have friends and family in the UK, and I was going back and forth to the UK just about maybe twice a year. So I would write letters and go to the museums. You know, there wasn't an internet. So you wrote letters, you put a stamp on, and you hope that someone on the other end would take you seriously. And I would book appointments to see the textiles and see the techniques and talk to the curators. And then I would come back and go, I think I can do that with a scalpel blade and a cutting board, which is what I did.
Wow.
And yeah, it was, I don't know, everyone kept telling me I was crazy, but it seemed to me fairly easy. It was just layers. One layer after another. When Ealdormere became a principality, it was also a Penzig reign. That was Penzig 19. And I wore that to Penzig, throughout the Penzig reign. And I want to tell you that I do not recommend wearing Elizabethan in 90-degree plus weather. No, not at all. It was just, it was really hot. When we came back from Penzig, So that would have been, a step down was September 1990. We stepped down and the Queen of the Middle Kingdom sort of dismissed everybody and she said, they can all go, but you can't. And Duchess Lisa was a very formidable woman. And I first thought was, oh my God, what have I done? And she called the Laurels together. And so October 1990, I was laureled for costume research. And then I was given my Viscounty. And
that's a lot of responsibility and job description to take on at once.
oh, you want more?
Sure.
Sure, okay. So September 1990. This is the only picture I have wearing my Viscounty coronet. Then October Crown Tournament for the mid-round. David won. And so now I'm back at coronation for the Middle Kingdom in May 1991 and back for Penzic 20.
Wow.
Yeah. So between my AOA and my laurel was almost just a bit around 18 months, April 1988 to September 1990. And then 6 weeks later, after stepping down from Principality Queen of the, I became Princess of the Middle Kingdom, and then back to the next war. And then I had a rest for a while.
Did that kind of give you time to figure out what it meant to be a laurel?
That's really interesting because I never really thought about what a laurel was. But I was so excited about, I got my laurel belt the day I was laureled because I really didn't have any idea about the relationship. I have a wonderful laurel named Mordred, and she does early period and she spins and she weaves and she dyes, and she taught me the things that I needed in order to understand the clothing I was making. As far as a relationship, I was too busy teaching people everything I learned. When I was princess, I was teaching people. When I was queen, I was, it was part of allied bargaining. I teach the ladies while the guys went off and slugged at each other. So when I became a laurel, it was, oh, I just got to keep teaching more. So there wasn't, I was shotgun laurel. Obviously, I had no idea what was going on. It was a bit of a whirlwind. Since then, I've had 5 apprentices laureled.
Wow.
Yeah, and they're not for, they are for a variety of things. Because as a costume research laurel, I take it that you can't separate the clothing from the society and the economics and the status it represents.
Exactly.
Therefore, you have to know the history and you have to know all that sort of stuff so that if you happen to turn up at an event wearing a 1530s Tudor and you're wearing blue and it's a court gown, you have to know that you've made a mistake. It would have been all right if you'd done a yeoman class in that color, but blue was a color that wasn't favored in that period for court Tudor gowns. So it just meant that I kept doing more and more layers to being a laurel.
And the research never ends.
It doesn't. It never ends, and it still never ends.
And you still go back to England regularly.
I do, and my husband was born in Italy, and so we also go back to Italy on a regular basis.
Fantastic.
So I get 2 different looks at history. Where he's from is a very remote area, and not a lot has changed. You know, you're face to face with a 14th century painting on a church wall, and the lady's dusting it.
Wow.
Yeah. So I tend to explore different clothings and different, I'm known for being a tutor, despite this is the chin lift, you know. But over the years, I've done a lot of different styles. Can I show you some?
Yes, please.
Okay, let me see now. What have I got here? That was essentially a 14th century coat harding. And, oh, this was a sideless surcoat out of Duchess weight satin that was extremely hot and heavy. There you can see a bit more of it there.
Oh, wow. It's got applique on it.
It has, now those dragons are part of Middle Kingdom heritage. They were I believe they were the dragons that were on Duchess Iceland's coronation dress. I could be really wrong, but they're beautiful. So there's two of them so that when the dress moved, the dragons swirled around each other.
Wow.
But the dress weighed about 20 pounds.
Goodness.
It was, yeah. So I experimented with a lot of early period stuff. I thought the only way I could learn how to do costuming was to start at the beginning and follow the threads through and try to understand how styles changed and how they adapt to different technologies. So I ended up, you know, look for that on the Lord of the Rings sites, apparently. You know, I adapted to having a look at what you could do with what you had. Just another one. Yeah, that's my husband now, Alfredo. So the houppelon. Am I going too fast?
No, you're fine.
Okay. Another toast back to the Elizabethan period.
Oh, and do you play harp too?
I did. I have picked it up for some time. When you have a farm, there's a lot of other things that you don't pick up that sort of go by the wayside. This was one of my apprentices, now Mistress Lecrache, and she had made the houppelon and the hennin, so I wore that for her laureling. It had one really big drawback. I'm about 5'8", and that's a fairly tall hat, and you couldn't get through the washroom stalls. It's just, this is 1912, and during the centenary for the Titanic, I was a guest speaker at a Titanic celebration. It was about 400 people. It was a fundraiser for the local museum.
Wow.
And I was their primary lecturer. So they cooked all 11 courses of the Titanic meal. I should tell you I'm wearing full 20th century corset and everything. And it was an 11-course meal, and then I had to get up and speak on 19th century and early 20th century manners and etiquette.
My goodness.
Yeah. My hairdresser did my hair. She was awesome.
Wow.
In the back, we had a farm up until August of last year. And we were members of Regia, which is a living history group that comes out of England that does Anglo-Saxon, basically stuff up until about 1066 in England. So we built essentially an Anglo-Saxon long hall in the back of the farm. And we had a few events there, and that was the inside of it.
Wow.
And there's some of the crew from our last event there. So these people came from all over. Some were from Indiana and Ohio, came up for the weekend, long weekend, so that they could practice with live steel archery, as well as doing some period stuff to that's relevant to that era, such as cooking and weaving, making arrows and beads.
Wow.
I had another life too. My husband and I did 19th century living history and reenactment. So we did everything from 1860s down to 1812.
Wow.
And this was my first horse, and I'm really on side saddle. I'm not sitting sideways. The habit is from a pattern from 1860. The corset was a riding corset from 1860. It's all authentic. And I think I have another picture. This was at another pioneer village with another one of my horses.
Mm.
So, yeah.
Wow.
I got to do that. But that's kind of boring, you know? After a while, you go riding around. I joined the cannon crew. I became a Parks Canada certified gunner. I had to take a course. And that's me looking cold and bored by the cannon. But I was the one that got to fire it.
That's exciting.
So, oh, it was great. You know, talk about stress relief. So yeah, I was the one that got to fire it. This is an 1860s ball gown, and there's 27 yards of very lightweight silk in that.
Wow.
As well as period corset, underpinnings, and unfortunately you can't see the shoes, but my husband's best man was a 19th century shoemaker, and so he made a pair of shoes that matched the dress.
Wow.
It was good. But I'm a tutor. I really am a tutor, you know.
Is that your favorite period to costume for?
Yes, absolutely. It is my favorite period. I have had a connection with the Tudors since I was probably 11 when I first heard about them in school. I guess my grandfather's second cousin married someone who connected us with the Tudors. So, you know, by marriage, I'm connected with them. By love and hate, I'm connected with them. It's a selected period. It's a very strange period though, because it has so much going on and a lot of things get railed when you just focus on Henry and his marital problems. But this was taken at SCA 50th, where I was talking about Tudor history and Tudor clothing. And they had a timeline set up, which was really interesting. And I got to man their timeline as a Tudor. And you have to dress the husband, of course.
Of course.
You absolutely have to. What can I say? I'm biased.
Wow.
Yeah, that was taken at Pensick.
Mm.
This lady, I can't for the life of me remember her name. But what was really good was when I first met her, I met her at Pensick. It was her first event, I believe. And when I met her at SCA 50th, she was on her way to get Laurel.
Aww.
And I was in tears. I was so happy for her because, you know, I mean, look at her. She's awesome. And that's what you want to see. I guess that's, you asked me how did I view being a Laurel? I'm an enabler. I want to enable people to be who they think they are and who they want to be, and let them just go. So yeah, I'm an enabler. And this is probably one of my proudest moments. This was a group of ladies, three of which out of that group are my apprentices. They weren't at the time. How this happened was, one of them said, she was doing Viking, and she said, I really like tutor, but it really scares me. And I told her, I said, it's easy. I have done living history and reenactments in tutor in the UK. I said, you take it apart layer by layer, and you just go one step at a time. That morphed into a 3-month course in, I believe it was 2003, where these ladies, some of whom drove 2 hours to get to the course once a week at the university at night. And we started with underwear, and we went all the way through, and there was a deadline. There was an event where they had to come out and have everything done. One of the ladies on the left in the gable hood was fixing her hood at some ungodly hour of the night. The other one in the pink, she was so frustrated, she threw her bodice across the room. So there was a lot of anxiety. But we pulled it off, and at this event, we all came out of the change room, and we all assembled and walked into the main hall as tutors.
It's amazing.
It was I was really proud of them. I still am. And they're pretty awesome ladies. They're way better than me. And speaking of doing reenactments, this is taken in England after my friend and I, she's done Kentwell and a lot of other living history tutor stuff. And we were talking to a group of church ladies. This is a good example of how you can reach out to just the public. A bunch of church ladies, and my dear friend Lettuce, she was talking to them about herbs and garden stuff, and I was talking to them about the responsibilities of a tutor shepherdess, what you had to do to, what your day was going to be like when you got up, and how you dressed and went out and dealt with the animals. So that was great. A lot of my friends are tutors. And the guy in the picture is actually Duke William, which your sister, I guess, is interviewing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's his daughter. But a lot of my friends are tutors.
And he was who you reigned with the second time.
Absolutely.
And we'll get to that.
Yes. Yeah. And that's one of my apprentices with Lucy, her daughter.
Lovely.
Yeah. So yeah, there's been a lot of tutor in my life. This one was another reenactment in England. I was a rough maker's apprentice, and it was the laundry for doing roughs. So I was her apprentice. I am wearing apprentice blue, which is totally appropriate as an apprentice, that working class blue.
Wow.
And this is a place called Donington-le-Heath. And the building, I believe, is medieval, and it goes back. There's a legend that Richard III stopped there on his way to Bosworth.
This picture is just so amazing.
It's great, isn't it?
Wow.
And the whole place, I mean, that's the neat part about doing living history where it belongs, is you don't have to act. You just
Because you're in it.
You're in it.
Yeah.
It's funny though, how I met my friend Lettuce that we saw back there. She was a gardener at Kentwell during one of their tutor days. And I was just visiting. And it's all first person. First person isn't scary. It's not scary at all. And so Lettuce is talking to me about gardening in first person as if she's a tutor. And I'm answering her back in first person as a tutor. And that's how we met. I mean, I don't understand why people panic over it, because you just let it go. If you know enough background, you let it go.
And it just happens.
Well, at least for me, it happens. It just happens. And it's kind of cool. I have another one. There's the other side of it.
Super cool.
Yeah, super cool. We had everything set up. The only thing, of course, we couldn't have was a proper fire going because of health and safety issues. So we were all just sort of miming through and this is to the public, right? This is to people who will ask some pretty difficult questions of you. And you learn to say, I have no idea. When I give advice to Laurels, when they're sitting their vigils, I tell them, learn to say, I have no idea, but let's go and look it up. You know, that's it. Oh, what else?
Absolutely, because just because you're a Laurel doesn't mean you know everything about everything.
No, in fact, you have to be very careful, because people will often hear you say something and it becomes the gospel. And it's really tough. Yeah. So I do spend a lot of my time saying, I don't know, but let's find out. And the other thing I tend to do with my apprentices is if they have a project, I will work through the project with them. And even if I don't know how to do it, I'll learn how to do it. And to try and just sort of see what it's like from their perspective, the frustrations and the joys.
That's how you walk a path with somebody. That's awesome.
Yeah, I guess that's a good way of putting it. So a lot of the stuff I do, like this picture, is it's period correct for reenactment. So there's two ways. When somebody asks me to look at their clothing as far as tutor goes, I always ask them, do you want me to look at it by SCA standards, or the 10-foot rule, or do you want me to look at it by living history standards, where we're going to get up close and personal on how you stitch your sleeves together, and, you know, colors, etc.
It's a really important distinction, and I find myself, because I make a lot of SCA cool things, and I find myself having to differentiate very clearly when I post pictures, because people will assume that it's a period thing that I'm making, and it's not.
Yeah, it's hard, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because I think it's kind of like the Hollywood thing. This is just my opinion, but the Hollywood thing is the Middle Ages was dreary and drab for the peasants, but for the crown it was gorgeous colors and lots of glitter. And I'm thinking of Errol Flynn, and the Robin Hood movies where Olivia de Havilland is wearing sequins, But the reality was, it wasn't drab. This is a yeoman class tutor, Henrican tutor from about 1530. The rooster, Harry, is a period breed that we raised called a Dorking.
Oh, he's beautiful.
The hat has been munched by sheep. So it's not terribly glitzy. And if you are looking at somebody as a candidate for a laurel, and this is all you see her in, and you're presented with somebody else who's got the glitz from the court tutor, even though the other one is probably not as period authentic as this, you're going to gravitate towards the Hollywood one. And it's kind of sad.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. If it involves chickens, I'm gravitating towards the chickens.
Oh yeah, the chickens. I love the chickens. This was taken at SCA 50th, where I was asked to represent the Tudor exhibition. They had a beautiful timeline, and they set up a tent that represented a nobleman's Tudor tent. Perhaps he was at, Field of the Cloth of Gold in 1520. So my job was to sit there and answer questions.
Wow.
And it was great.
Fun.
Some of the questions were typical to what, and I spoke in first person. It was typical. Well, Henry VIII didn't kill all his wives and eat their babies.
Well, that's disappointing.
Yeah, I know. It's so sad. I have such a love-hate relationship with that man. We won't even get into it. Speaking of which, you know what this place is. This is Hampton Court Palace. So in 2012, my husband and I and Lettuce and her husband and another friend of mine, Rachel, we stayed at Hampton Court Palace for 4 days. We stayed in Fish Court. So Fish Court is, if you look on the right, you'll see a big sort of roof, and that's the great kitchen. And Fish Court is just off to the side of it. This was our palace for 4 days.
Wow.
And, this was what we saw. We ran around the palace at night. They gave us a night tour where there was just us, and every room we went through, they would, shut the security off for us. For 4 days, this tutor ran like a kid in a candy shop through Hampton Court.
Wow.
Yeah, and our rooms were at the end of this corridor. That's Fish Court, you see. And at the very other end of that, if you were to turn around, is the entrance to the great kitchen. Wow. So it was absolutely fabulous. They took us on, well, there we are, 2002. 12, sorry. They took us on a tour at night. And I got to sit in the chairs in the Great Hall with just us at night and look down the length of the hall. And, you didn't have to pretend. Everything was dark. They only had a few lights on.
Wow.
And yeah, it was pretty awesome.
Did you have just tears streaming down your face?
I think I was sitting like that.
Nice.
I was just sitting like, yes. Yeah, you got it. Yes.
I own this.
I own this. This is mine. Bring on, bring it on. It was just, yeah, I do tend to sit like that a lot. But yeah, that was brilliant. That was awesome. And the thing was, it was 2012. See, I do sit like that a lot. So it's 2012 that we were at Hampton Court. And a few days later, my friend Lettuce arranged for us to meet with the archaeologists that had exhumed the body of Richard III. So we didn't have to stand in the long lines. We had a private viewing. And what you're seeing there is the grave of Richard III. The little sort of thing that looks like a ping pong ball on the right with the indentation is where his head was.
Wow.
The body is where the puddle is. And unfortunately, his feet were cut off in a Victorian excavation for a new brick outhouse. And also got to meet the archaeologists and that. At this time, I was the vice chairman for the Richard III Society of Canada.
Wow. So that opened some doors for you.
That opened a lot of doors because I ended up attending Richard's reinterment in March of 2015. And I saw the last medieval king of England buried, reinterred. Wow. I got to process because of another friend. I got to process from Holy Cross Catholic Church to the Leicester Cathedral with a group of Dominican monks and sit with them while they sang a requiem mass that Richard would have had sung for him. And that, this Richard III thing is a whole other interview. I was probably, for the most part, less than 10 feet away from his coffin.
Wow.
So yeah, it was something else. And then you turn around and you get interviewed by BBC and you see Benedict Cumberbatch who read the eulogy. And
oh my.
Yeah. It was for someone who is interested in that period of history, it was a total, it's like tickets to the biggest rock concert you could imagine for a whole week.
Wow.
It's exhausting. So, but then you get around to 2017, was it? 2016, October, and Duke William, he fought for me at Ealdormere Crown Tournament now, and he won. And it's funny because I'd never actually seen him fight. I had no idea. And when the last round was going on, I was sitting in front of his wife and my apprentice, and I didn't see the final shot. I had no idea what was going on. You would think I had no clue about this at all. La la la. No clue whatsoever on any of it. So yeah, next thing I know, I'm Princess of Beldomir, and a week later we jetted off to Italy for, I think it was 2 weeks or 3 weeks.
Wow.
Yeah, and it was another Penzic reign. So in all, I've sat the throne 3 times as royalty, and 3 times each one has been at Penzic. So I'm kind of, one young man called me the proverbial war queen. So this was coronation in April 2017, and we based it off of Elizabeth's coronation. So my husband made the canopy of estate, and what was a little different was I involved the College of Heralds. I believe in rule by implication. Everybody has to be involved. Everybody's going to be enabled in ways that may scare them. Totally. When I was Queen of the Mid-Realm, they called me she who must be obeyed. And that came about in a variety of reasons, but the most truthful one is that someone was giving a toast and couldn't remember my name and just came out and said, she who must be obeyed. And it stuck.
Not a bad nickname to have.
Not a bad nickname to have. The fabric here was a nightmare. The fabric is a reproduction of 16th century fabric. And if you look at, what's his name? Stewart. What's his name? The guy who did Star Trek, Patrick Stewart. When Patrick Stewart and Glenn Close are in Macbeth, he's wearing this fabric. It's from England. But I had it's a very stiff fabric. It has absolutely no sense of humor whatsoever. None whatsoever. And so it has no give.
Ugh,
And it really is like wearing cloth of gold.
wow.
The other thing that was really interesting about this coronation is Quilliam, the king is usually crowned first and then crowns the queen. Quilliam allowed me to be crowned first. And we had the heralds involved in it extensively. And I'm actually being crowned by the gentleman who at the time was the principal herald of Beldomir,
Wow.
who quit shortly after.
You scared him off.
But yeah, his hands were shaking.
Oh,
But I felt that that would have been appropriate. In that period, it would have been the Archbishop of Canterbury. So I let my hair down and we tried to be as appropriate and as period as possible. And that fell to the chief herald to actually do that.
wow. How exciting.
It was. And then, of course, after I was crowned, we had Quilliam come up. Bless his heart. Quilliam's a Viking persona. I just want to point that out. Quilliam came up and he was also crowned by the herald. So it was a different moment.
Wow.
And you can see that dress really has no sense of humor, no give to it.
Nope.
Nope.
So I have a question from the audience.
Yeah.
Duke Johan from the Outlands would like to know, how long does it take on average for Her Grace to dress for the circumstance or event or occasion? And has she ever done 2 to 3 costume changes?
Yes. I have done 2 to 3. I've done 2 costume changes. If you notice the pictures, I did my Ealdormere princess reign in late period. I did the Middle Kingdom reign in an earlier period because I smartened up. It takes me, to get into the one that's on the screen right now, takes me about 45 minutes. I'm completely period, totally, even the stockings, the shoes, everything. It's a good 45 minutes. When I was Princess of Ealdormere, I would change for court, and I found that you really need to know what you're doing to get somebody dressed in this. And I insisted that the people who attended me were new people, or very new people, or people who needed the experience of serving royalty and would perhaps never, get on the dais. So I had a lot of people who knew what a tea tunic was. And then they'd be faced with this. So yes, I've done 2 costume changes. Yes, 45 minutes. And yes, I did smarten up when I became Queen of the Mid-Realm.
Because that's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work. Oh, and I passed out once at court when I was Princess of Beldomir in that nice white Spanish. And His Grace Sir Doggin, he bailed me over his shoulders and carried me out of court.
Oh. Corsets are no joke. I started out doing Elizabethan and stopped because I had a really bad, I spent like 12 or 13 hours straight in a corset and I had a panic attack getting it off. And I have not put one on since.
I rode side saddle in my corsets.
You're amazing.
Yeah, that I guess that was just it doesn't bother me. It doesn't bother me. Do you know what? When you put that on, or when I put that on, I am Tangwystl Tudor. I have space, I have gravity. Elizabeth I was right. It's power dressing. It really is. You are well, you take up space. And I will forever bless the person who decided handicap washrooms should be installed. But it gives you a sense of gravitas. You are who you think you should be.
Yeah, you can't not be regal in those costumes.
You can't. If you try, you're absolutely shaming the entire period. You just might as well do, Carry On Tudor movies. This is poor William in his Tudor. He's a sweetheart. He really is. And I was so proud at Penzic of keeping up to him, because I was 60 and he wasn't even 30. And I didn't know that. So I would like dump into bed every night, shattered, totally shattered. And he'd go out partying. I'm like, oh my God, where's he getting this? Well, now I know.
He's a baby.
He was a baby.
How did you come to have him fight for you?
His wife, Bailey, is Countess Elizabeth, and she's a Tudor. We just got to know each other, and she's like a sister. Oh, she's like, this is a funny thing, it goes back to being an enabler. If I can enable people to get into good mischief and have fun, then that's what it's about. And we just, along with another one of my apprentices, Bridget, we just got into good fun. And she and Quilliam, it just came to pass.
Wow.
She didn't want to sit the throne again. She had a child. She had Bria, who's now going to be 5. And she was happy where she was. And Quilliam fought for me. And I have that clip of what he said to the people when he was making his declaration at the Crown tournament. And I was just literally, I had no idea what he was going to say. Maybe he didn't himself, but I was absolutely blown away, totally blown away. It was something else.
Wonderful.
Yeah. And yeah, that was cool. And again, I'm Tudor. Doesn't he make a great Tudor king?
He does. He looks good.
He does. He looks he knows the part. He practically grew up in the SCA, so it's second nature to him. It was just a joy. It was just a lot of fun. And something very strange happened at Penzic. Ealdormere is generally an allied kingdom. You have the protagonists at Penzic who are, now it's the debatable lands where you have Ethelmark, but it's principally always boiled down to the East Kingdom and allies and the Middle Kingdom and allies. At Penzic that year, the East Kingdom king was someone I knew, and the Middle Kingdom king had been one of my Queen's guards years ago when I was mid-realm queen, and they both declared that they couldn't fight against me, against Ealdormere. And rather than ally, themselves with Ealdormere, they made Ealdormere, it became a triple alliance. So it was 3 equals, Ealdormere, the Mid-Realm, and the East Kingdom against everyone else, whoever declared for each side. So it was really special. And yeah, it was something I think Quilliam really loved. And a lovely lady made this fabulous banner to celebrate it.
Wow.
Yeah. And that is my favorite picture. That is the, isn't that great? That is the king of the East Kingdom, the king of the Middle Kingdom, and the king of Ealdormere. That alliance that was formed for that Pennsic. And that was just, that's my favorite picture. They're such hands. Such good people. And that's the thing. Oh, here you go. Look how young I am.
Wow.
This was so cool. This was August 1990 at Pennsic. This is August 2017 at Pennsic. And it's, it's the same umbrella over the head. But I need the facelift now.
No, you don't. You're beautiful. How did you choose your name?
Oh, there were no Tangwystls when I chose my name. And my mother's Irish and my father's Welsh. And I'm married to an Italian, pray for me. The name, actually, I was just looking for names in a dictionary that was in the library. And it was a Welsh dictionary, and Tangwystl means a pledge of peace. And I thought, I like that.
Yeah.
It just, and since then, there's been more Tangwystls. There's a lovely lady in the Middle Kingdom who I've met since then now, who called herself Ankarid for Tangwystl. So yeah, it's connections you make with people. And with my name, it was an unusual enough name that people couldn't remember it and just called it She Who Must Be Obeyed. Or if they did remember it, they had fun with it and putting it in songs and poems. I think I sent you some links about those. Some of them are really a lot of fun. And they're true, by the way.
And I'll put those in the comment section when we're done with the interview.
Yeah, they're true. Nobody made any of them up. In fact, I think they've sanitized them. Oh, yeah. You asked me again, going back to what is to be a laurel. It also means that regardless of your rank, whether you're queen or not, you are still a laurel. And that means that you still get out there and teach people. This was, we called it Tea with the Queen. This was a newcomers class at Pennsic when I was Queen of Beldomir.
Wow.
And these were newcomers, with the exception of the young man in the back with the nice, pretty white belt. And he was there because he was having a hard time years ago. And I asked him if he would be on my team to fight for a rose tournament. And, I've never won a rose tournament, and I never will win a rose tournament, because the people I want to fight for me are the people that are reaching out and are grasping for that, not that peerage, but that reason why we all dress up and do what we do. They're looking for that glimpse in the corner of their eyes that say, I'm almost there.
Right.
We've all seen that. So getting everybody involved. That means the children. And this was the parade of the Ealdormerian cavalry, with my husband heading it on his hobby horse. But that was getting kids together to make hobby horses and wooden swords. And this was an event where we had them process in with us.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. And that's where it starts, is the kids were required to look at what hobby horses were like in period and make them. It was great.
Wow.
You also have to speak a lot. This was a knighting, Sir Keir von Atzinger at FCA 50th. You have to be confident enough in yourself in order to stand up in front of people unscripted and not come out with a garble or what they used to call queen's mouth. And again, it's the same thing. I am nothing without them. If you're a Laurel, you are nothing without your students. You are nothing without helping people and enabling them and not being a jerk.
Yeah.
Not being, what's the word? Not putting it over on everyone. I tell people when I give classes that let's get something straight right now, front and center. My birth certificate does not say I was born in 1457. It doesn't say I was born in the 16th century. None of yours too. Everything is fluid and it's up for grabs. Look at Richard III. Nobody thought, they thought everything was Tudor propaganda, that, he didn't have scoliosis or anything like that. And look, we find him and it rewrites history. So it's fluid and it's always up for grabs. And it's what makes us keep coming back. I think what makes me keep coming back to my books. And I'm a book person.
Me too.
Yeah. But that's why you do it, isn't it?
People and the research, yeah.
Yeah.
And sharing that passion.
I mean, the things that happen to you along the road, the people you meet, the events you get to participate in, I wouldn't trade any of those. The best thing that happened to me was the SCA, without a doubt, because it allowed me to be the person. It's almost experimental archaeology if you want to really boil it down to bones. But it allows you to be the person you read about when you were a young girl or a young man, the whole romance of it. And then if you take that and get underneath it, you start to realize that there are people like us and they had the same fears and the same joys as us. So now you start to dig deeper and that brings you into the living history aspect of things. You start to walk around in the mud and the rain and think, okay, my skirt is way too long for this. My chemise doesn't come down to my ankles. And so my skirt's going to be ankle length and I'm going to be wearing good stout oiled shoes. And you start to reappraise some of what you read in history books. It's fluid. We're people. We are all. Yeah.
Just people.
I have had to do my chores at the barn in my yeoman tutor and found how it works and how it doesn't work. And, when I tuck my skirts up to go, get the chickens and the horses in. And that was a real learning experience when you do that. So.
That's some next level stuff. You've had some amazing experiences.
But the next level stuff is, I think you can do the next level stuff in the SCA. You just have to, be brave.
Yeah.
You just have to create some kind of scenario in your head that says, I'm a tutor, and if you're a Viking, that's fine. I'm going to completely ignore the fact that you're a Viking, and I'm going to carry on as if I am who I am, and not be afraid to do first person stuff. One of my apprentices asked, how do you come up with things? And the only way I can think of it is you have to know not just the history behind the clothing, but you have to know the folklore behind the clothing. and the folklore behind the history. And, you know, what people ate and what people were afraid of and what they dreamt of.
Cultural context.
Cultural context, social, you know, with my apprentices, I tell them that the easiest way to understand your persona is to give yourself a job and figure out, go research how much you made at that job. Go find a place to live. And I really, you know, I encourage them to go find, you know, go to a historical park and find a period place to live. One of my apprentices lives in a place that looks like Bayleaf Cottage, you know, in a Weldon Downland Museum. That puts her into a context. And so if you have those parameters and you know your worth, then you can start to estimate what you're going to have for dinner and what you're going to have for fun. And this all comes back to, I did some in 1998. I was over in the UK and I met up with Ruth Goodman and her husband, Mark, way before anybody was famous. And I traveled with her to some events, and I traveled with her through Wales, and we had a very good time. I learned a lot about people and parameters. And at the same time as I was doing that, I met another guy called Stuart Peachy, who does English Civil War stuff. And he's the person who was behind the Green Valley series. And at one point, I was actually going to join his living history group there for, you know, he takes people in sessions, but, you know, life happens. But you come down to where you're living, what you have access to, what your markets are, what your society is. And you can't say, okay, I live in the south of England, but I'm going to, and it's 16th century, but I'm going to wear amber. Because that just wouldn't have flown. You know, not a big amber necklace. They just, so you start, you see what I'm trying to explain is you start looking at where you are located, and that governs even what colors you wear, what dye plants are available. Are you on a trading route? You know, are the tinkers going to come? And it starts building up layers and layers. So the next thing you know is it's really easy to slip into a first person because you live there.
Because you know what, you know your surroundings so well.
Yeah, you know your surroundings. One time Vanessa and I, Lettuce and I were speeding down one of the motorways, and she slams on the brakes because we found a patch of weld. So, you know, you bail out in the middle of a highway and you grab the weld and you go home and dye something with it. It's that sort of serendipity and knowing where you come from. The problem with a lot of persona development is they tend to want everything already written down. You know your whole story. Well, we don't. We don't. I don't. So as a Laurel, it's my job to enable people to get themselves into the right frame of mind and the right context so that when they look at a project, it actually is a lot easier because they know where they should be and they're not tempted to mix periods, mix statuses. Oh, that's that. Nothing shows it up worse than, you know, a 60-year-old woman who's dressing in the latest court fashion as if she was 20. And around her waist, she looks like a tinker's donkey because she's got her cup and everything else. So it's kind of learning to look at yourself critically and say, would you have had this? Would you go outside now with your cup around your waist? it's that way. Does that make sense?
It does. And it's interesting because I've been approaching some of my students who are newer with more of a make clothing that you feel comfortable and pretty in,
Yes.
and get you in the door. And then as you get more invested in the SCA, then get more and more into what it really should look like and what colors you really should be wearing. And I'm not sure how to take somebody from the starting point right into what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's when you're doing living history, one of the most boring positions you can get, and it's usually the ones that are given to people who are just starting in the group, is to do upper class. Because all you do is sit around, gossip, and sew, right?
Right.
There's not a lot to do. So getting them into entry-level positions actually does a couple of things. It gives them comfortable clothes, but it also gives them sort of a backstory that they can then build on and feel a comfort zone. So I try and sort of approach what they're doing through that angle. So I don't tend to want to push them too much into upper class unless they really want that, because it's really boring.
Right.
You know, when you're doing your living history stuff, you want to do something. You want to get out there. Yeah, you want to make something. So people like me, who are more on the academic side, end up in living history generally being the punter, that the person that explains the scenario to people, to the public, and then goes from there. So I'm generally either the upper class or the yeoman class who greets the people, sets up the stage, kind of like the narrator in Henry V.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you set the stage up for them. So that's kind of what I do as the Laurels. I try to set the stage up for them and give them a backstory or suggest a backstory that they can use, and try and get them into a class of clothing where, like you, absolutely, there's a comfort zone.
Right.
And do it that way.
Right.
And the thing is, I'll stay right there with them and suffer through it.
Well, yeah.
I am not a seamstress. Everything I have ever sewn, including the one that's on the screen right now, have enough air miles to go around the world. And I tell my apprentices, if it doesn't have air miles, if you haven't thrown it against the wall, you're doing it wrong. You know, just chuck it. Yeah, you'll feel better.
Because it's a struggle.
Oh, it's horrible.
Yeah.
You know, and my husband helps me fit my bodices because I've made everything by myself. And I wonder why I bothered with late period and didn't just stick with tea tunics. Don't know why. But you know what? When I first did my first Elizabethan, which everybody thought was just a showstopper, and it was 50-cent yard material, I stood in front of the mirror and my hands automatically assumed, the Holbein position in front at the waist. And I thought, wow, that's the only place that's really comfortable. And it was like a serendipitous moment that you suddenly plugged in and said, I've done something here. I found something out. These ladies aren't standing here because this is the fashion. They're standing because your gravity with the corset and everything else is moved down there. And you walk differently. And you have a different status when you're wearing the right clothes. Yeah. Even if you're wearing the yeoman class, you have a different status.
Yeah. It's fascinating.
It is. It's different because the tutors, to go back to them mostly because that's my familiarity, is your status was what you wore. And you walked differently if you had a different status. You know, if you were a yeoman and you passed somebody who's higher status, you didn't dare look them in the eye. You weren't a person. You know, you were part of that chain. You were lower. You were breadcrumbs. So that's part of doing the costuming, and part of being a Laurel is to give them the sense that, you know, it's all connected. It's not just a one-off, like a big tapestry that you're weaving. I think that's cool.
It's really cool.
I've had some pretty awful food from the period.
Some of it's really good though.
But some of it, oh. You know, somebody served me jelly eels once in cream sauce.
No.
Told me it was Henry VIII's favorite, which, you know, and I'm like, I can't eat this. It's like, oh.
I have experienced fish aspic and
Yeah.
I couldn't do it.
Yeah. I did it because they had worked so hard and were so proud of it. And I'm like, oh my God. The things you do. You feel like the things I do for the crown.
I'm eating eel jello.
Oh, in cream sauce. I think it had nutmeg on it. Oh my God, it was treachery.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. But I mean, what an accomplishment for that cook. That's,
yeah. That,
you know,
she got the damn things and dealt with them, you know.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and I'm thinking, you know, how many people in history have I read about that, you know, choked on eels and lampreys? I'm like, oh.
Please live through this meal. Please live through this meal.
Please don't let there be a reformation before I get through this meal. I need all the saints I can get. Oh dear.
Wow.
Yeah, it's and that's part of it, isn't it? Is learning to laugh at what we do. Don't take yourself seriously. Don't get your buttons in a twist. You know, I've met some pretty arrogant people, and they think that if they show they think if they show arrogance, they're being period. And no, they're just being jerks. You know, arrogance in period was something that you didn't have to show off. It was something that you were born with innately. And you didn't have to, you know, you weren't nouveau rich. You came from an old family and you knew who you were and what you were worth. So you didn't have to be a jerk to the little people.
It just came naturally.
It absolutely comes naturally. That swanning on the throne thing. Yeah. Oh God,
Awesome.
I couldn't believe that's how I sat in those chairs at Hampton Court. It was just, oh, you know.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So going back to your SCA journey, you reigned in 2017.
Yeah.
And then pretty immediately after you stepped down, moved out to Antir.
Yeah. So we had hoped, my husband and I both have dual citizenships. I have UK and Canadian, and he has Italian and Canadian. And of course, until Brexit, I had my EU passport. So I stepped down in October 2017, and the goal was that we were going to emigrate either to the UK or to Italy, where my husband had land at the time. In September 2017, my husband decided to have a heart attack at an event. And So that was September 2017, stepped down in October 2017, and then in March 2018, he decided to follow it all up by having a stroke. So that meant that we were not able to emigrate to either Italy or the UK because of the health restrictions and healthcare and all of that sort of stuff. So we looked for the next warmest place we could and still stay within the healthcare region. And we ended up on Vancouver Island. We sold the farm and put the sheep and animals in sanctuary, and that was so hard. And it's still hard now. We still look around, what's for sale. And we ended up here. We bought the house sight unseen on the internet and moved in August 2019.
Wow.
So it was a bit of a whirlwind. It seems to me how I do things.
And then you got hit with a pandemic.
Oh, yes. Thank you. So the pandemic, yeah. We discovered that, these houses don't have basements, and I was used to having the barn to play in. So we had some guy build 2 10-by-10 sheds, and I turned mine into a medieval sanctuary, and Al turned his into a workshop. That's been our COVID project. But yeah, then COVID hit and it all went. We've been to 3 events. We were at 3 events before COVID hit. A Yule event here in Heartwood, a Tudor Christmas event in Secret, and investiture in February of last year. And that's been it. Yeah.
Wow.
It's just kind of hit the wall. I have an apprentice here.
Oh, that's exciting.
Yeah, she lives not far, and she's an awesome weaver. So we meet together about once a week, try to, and just try and do the things that we've been talking about. Try and understand where you're from in order to see what you should be making and what projects you should be going after and how you should be presenting them.
Wow.
Documentation. I love documentation. You know what I used to do, and it's so bad when I think about it. I'm such an awful. When people would ask me to judge A&Ss, I don't like giving people marks. That's too close to pass and fail. But I would bring my books and my papers in a cardboard box, and I would sit there and say, okay, this is what you should do, and this is the letter I got from this, and the pictures I got from this museum. And people would say, well, she doesn't know what she's doing. She has to bring her books. But it was because I wanted people not to look at me like I was telling them. I wanted them to know that the books were out there and they had the power to do it. They had the power to open the book and to do the research. And you were just like me. We all started at ground zero. I started with a treadle.
Are there more pictures, or should we stop screen sharing?
We could probably stop screen sharing.
Okay.
I don't think there's my emblem.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah. Stop share, right?
Yep.
Oh, look at that.
There we go. Now we have big faces.
Oh, yeah, we do. I see how this works. Yeah, so being a Laurel is pretty scary because people think you know everything. I guess it's kind of like being maybe not a pelican, because they do know everything. And it's not like being a knight, because they'll tell you they know everything, whether they do or not. But being a Laurel is pretty scary because, when you're a new Laurel, you have this expectation on yourself that you're supposed to know everything, and that you've been judged by your peers worthy of this accolade because you know everything. And man, there's got to be some way we can tell people out there that It's not like that.
You're doing it now.
Yeah, it's not like that at all. You know, when Laurels get together and talk about people, they need to get together and remember that they started there. And,
Yeah.
you know, it's the same journey. It's exactly the same journey. Yeah, I'm doing it now.
Yeah, and you talked about bringing your box of research to make sure that people knew, you know, that they can enable themselves. And one of my indicators for when my students are ready to start being considered to be elevated is when they're doing research beyond what I've done. They've met what I'm doing and they've gone further and they're wiping the floor with me. And I'm like, okay, you ready?
Yeah, it's when you can sit there with them and have an academic discussion where you can challenge a thesis and they can defend it. And then you know they're ready. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. You know, if you can sit there and I'm forever throwing out, you know, what do you think of this one? You know, and challenging them to think differently. So if you have a thesis and it's everybody believes that thesis, you have to remember it's still a question, it's still a thesis. So let's have an argument about it.
And
You know?
and all research is like that. You know,
Yeah.
it's one of the things that I try to get people to understand is there's like for my time period, the archaeology starts in the 1920s.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you have to look at the research, you have to look at the government they're doing research under and what the government did and didn't allow them to say.
Yeah. Exactly.
Sometimes they know about weaving, sometimes they don't. It's you have to take everything in its context and really think about it and develop your own opinions and your own theories, because even though, you know, so and so is like the god archaeologist of the time period, they don't know everything. And maybe they aren't living history people and they haven't worn the clothes and used the tools like we have.
Yeah. Yeah. So. Exactly. And you're right. I mean, research in the 1920s is not what it is now. And neither is history static, because you get into you know, revisionist history, which starts now to look at, you know, women's positions and were they the silent minority and how things were, and you start to look through wills. I love wills. You know, it's hard in your period, but in this period, the Tudor period, they're out there.
And they have inventories and I think we lost you again. Boo.
Just had a blimp.
Oh, okay, I can hear you.
Okay, good.
Hi.
They're starting to be digitized now, so you can actually get into the heads of what these people were saying and thinking. There's a really good one that really hit me was a man who was off. He'd been called up in the Cousins' War, the War of the Roses, and he was on his way to battle, and he made his will. And one of the lines was, "Rest me where God sees fit to let me lie." And I thought, that says a lot there. You know, he had no expectations about where he was, but his expectation was he was going to die. So I love that sort of thing, because suddenly, in some ways, you're into that person's head in a very small way. And he becomes not just two dates on a stone or a date in a book, he becomes a person. And then you find, of course, his will was probated, and you know. And that to me is what living history, that's what I really want the SCA to be. I really want, if I can do the smallest thing through being a Laurel, is to pull people away from the competition of it and bring them back to the faces of it.
And really just getting into doing. I think we lost her again. There she is.
There I am. Hello.
So we are at about an hour and a half. I'm not getting, oh, there we go. I don't know if you're muted or if your connection is bad.
Yeah, I will. But I don't.
Oh, what a bummer. So I'm not getting any audio at all from you. And right now your video is frozen. So I missed that last, I don't know, 30 seconds. Let's try turning your video off and maybe we can wrap up just with audio. You can't hear me? Shoot. Okay. I am going to try and
I stopped the video. Can you hear me better?
yes, that's perfect.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, good idea. So we've been at this for about an hour and a half. Is there anything we haven't talked about that you would like to talk about?
Gosh. I just want people to, I've been interviewed a lot of times, and the thing that really I want people to know is that I was the same person as they were, standing there on the edge of it all, watching. And you can do the same thing. There's no magic behind it. I mean, I know have said, well, she can't be a Laurel unless she served for, been an apprentice for 7 years. Don't use that to judge people. I wasn't an apprentice for 7 years. So, and that kind of annoys me is when people use that as the, the measuring stick against a Laurel. I usually say in meetings, what are you waiting for? The person to die before you lower them and have them totally fed up with it all? You want them fresh and eager at the fight. Really, I guess that's the biggest thing, is that we are all here, and don't sit there and judge somebody from your high seat because you've got it and they haven't. You are there because people believe in you, whether you are Laurel, a knight, or sitting on the crown. And the same thing I said years ago, if you can't enable people be part of the belief, then you're just sitting there in a corset and a lid on your head that gives you a headache.
Yeah. If you can't lift others up, what are you doing? It's not even.
Yeah. It's
Agreed.
just.
Okay, well, I don't have any other questions, I don't think. And if you feel like we've covered everything, maybe we should try to get your video up again so we can say goodnight.
Okay, here I go. Start video.
There you are. Oh, it's maybe. So thank you very much for your time. it's been amazing getting to know you. I really look forward to spending time with you in person at some point. And welcome to Ontier. Okay. Well, thank you everyone for watching and spending our American election night with us. And tomorrow night, my sister and I are interviewing Duchess Helga from the West. And that's all I can remember right now. So again, Your Grace, thank you very much. And I guess we'll say good night.
Good night, my dear, and thank you so much for listening to an old woman prattle.
Oh, it's been fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing your journey.
All right.
Good night.
Stay safe. Good night.